Hi everyone, it's Sunday, April 24th, time for another HideNet Week in Review. I'm Vera Dordick. So we're happy to be back after a little Easter break last week. Of course, little has actually changed in the market, especially in the US where prices are still weak overall, but there is some discussion of being at or near a potential floor. So we'll have to see what happens this week. Heavy Texas steer prices were reported to be anything from steady to a couple of dollars lower. So selections at 62, 64 pounds were selling for $23 to $25, with the lower price generally being for volume sales. Some producers started saying they were sold out of a certain steer selection, although others are skeptical of the claim, so we'll see what happens there as well. In the cow sector, prices are still eroding because they are very dependent on sales to China, and we all know how mired in problems with COVID that country is right now. Looking at the export figures, sales were decidedly higher last week. In fact, combined export sales for the week ending April 14th were 744,500, which is almost 50% higher than the previous one. Combined shipments, on the other hand, were down by 28% at 549,200. In the U.S., slaughter for the week was a little higher by 5% at 665,000. Turning to Europe, editor Andrea Guolo reports that prices are stable overall, but that's not because of any market or demand improvements, and it's only because there were few, if any, conclusions for business this week. In fact, the market appears to be on a downward trend, and there was some softening of prices for a few hide origins. The UK this week was one of the places that saw few sales concluded, and they had a tendency to be at the lows of recent weeks. So English 36 plus ox sold at £1 10 cents in sterling, and in Ireland, prices were at €1 per kilo for the same weight. Looking at European bulls, Andrea reports that there were some price drops because the market is generally blocked. Some reductions were seen in France, and this week the price of southern German bulls was steady at €1.75, but it is anticipated to drop to €1.65 somewhere in the near future. For European cows, there were more sales again last week than there were for bulls. That said, some northern German cows may be asking for €1 per kilo, but they're not getting it. In the veal sector, the market is still rigid, but demand is a bit weaker except for the highest levels. And among sheepskins, there was little, if any, change. In his analysis, Andrea discusses what's going on with the blocked negotiations in Europe and what's happening now that the tanneries seem to be in a wait-and-see mode. From South America, editor Ronald Guiel says that raw material prices dropped another 14 cents this week after having done so the previous week. The average price is now $3.11 per kilo. By contrast, TR1 remains steady with a reference price of 92 cents per square foot. In other news from Brazil, the footwear sector grew nearly 10% in 2021, and footwear component exports were up by 16% in the first quarter of this year. From elsewhere in Latin America, in Argentina, the Nonogasta tannery is set to reopen in May, and you might remember that was called Cortum CBR. In Mexico, the manufacturing sector saw its employment up slightly in February, and that includes footwear. And in Paraguay, that country exported more than 300% more footwear to Brazil in the first quarter. Peruvian footwear exports were up over 20% in the first 2 months. And in Uruguay, fire destroyed a deboning plant and some cold chambers at the Mendoza refrigerator. So that's all we have for this week. And until next week, good night from HideNet.